On January the 2nd, 1777, the American Revolution was nearing its end.
Fall back, men! Fall back!
Merely 6 months into the war, it seemed certain that General Washington, in full retreat, was to be captured by Cornwallis, brought to England, tried for treason, and hung. This day was especially dire for Washington, as his entire army was retreating down the King's Highway through the small village of Maidenhead, with the redcoats in hot pursuit. A relatively small group of Continental soldiers and militiamen, led by an unknown colonel, were all that separated Cornwallis from ending the American Revolution. That colonel was Edward Hand. His men, including the riflemen of the 1st Pennsylvania Regiment, used innovative weaponry and brilliant tactics to stop the advance of the greatest military on earth. On January 2nd, 1777, Colonel Edward Hand may have saved George Washington and the Continental Army, a story that quietly became a footnote in the Revolution. Born in Ireland in 1744, Edward Hand would go on to earn his medical certificate at Trinity College in Dublin. He then enlisted in the 18th Regiment of Foot, the Royal Irish Army, to complete his medical training.
Edward Hand, like most Americans, was an immigrant. He came from Ireland. He had been trained in the medical field. He was a legitimate assistant to a surgeon called a surgeon's mate.
He was a statesman. He was a general. He was the first general to realize how important the Pennsylvania long rifle could be in the war, and that was very significant.
After the war, he was a politician, held both in the state legislature and in local Lancaster history, and finally ended his life as a farmer, running this plantation here in Lancaster.
After the French and Indian War, Hand moved to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where he set up his own medical practice. By the time war erupted between the Americans and the Crown, Hand was fully immersed in the American frontier culture. He was an ardent supporter of the Patriot cause. With his military experience, Hand quickly rose within the ranks of the Continental Army.
He had been in the British Army. He had been an Army surgeon, but he had fallen in love with living in America, living free on the frontier. And so when the Revolution came, he threw in immediately with his neighbors, his new neighbors in Pennsylvania.
And then the opportunity arises for him to become an officer in the 1st Pennsylvania Regiment after Lexington and Concord.
When the war started to break off, they started forming militia units in Lancaster and in Pennsylvania. And of course, Hand, with his years of experience in the British Army, was a resource to them.
But he was determined that America should be independent, that he'd had quite enough of England, thank you very much, and he became a very active Whig, a supporter of American liberties, of American independence. That's how he got to be colonel of the 1st Pennsylvania Regiment.
But it was a difficult time to be leading men in the war for independence. With the British winning battle after battle over the Americans, morale was running low in the Continental camp. Total defeat was looking more and more plausible with every passing day.
By the time Washington got across New Jersey, it looked as if the Revolution was over. And actually, if the British hadn't paused and gone into winter camp the way they always did, only fight in the summer, fight in nice weather, if they hadn't stopped the assault across New Jersey, it's doubtful whether the American Army and the Revolution would have succeeded.
But morale was not good. After all, the American Army didn't have uniforms, didn't have enough food, didn't have enough weapons. And at that time, the British Army was probably the greatest army in the world. So the morale was very poor. In fact, Washington actually writes to a cousin that the game is nearly up, that he really thinks that the war may have ended and that they're going to be defeated, and that's it.
A victory was crucial to raise the morale of the troops and keep hope alive for the Revolution. Washington set his eyes on Trenton in the winter of 1776 with a surprise attack on the Hessian forces. To win at Trenton, Washington needed the perfect battle plan and a little bit of luck.
That battle went exactly to his battle plan, exactly the way he called it. First, it had to be a thunderstroke, a lightning attack, successful in short time, because only 8 and 10 miles away, respectively, were other large British garrisons that could have reinforced the Hessians. So we had to win hurriedly. How do you do that? You plan. 1,600 Hessians in the town of Trenton. Fine. Attack with 2,700 Continentals, a surplus of 1,000 men. The Hessians have 6 cannons. Fine. Bring over 18 cannons, because a lot of this fighting is going to take place in the street, and the most deadly weapon on the face of the planet in the street is a cannon. All this planned. Attack from both the north and the south sides of the town simultaneously. All these things, that's exactly what he did. The Hessians, to be perfectly honest with you, and some of the historians might disagree with this, some Americans might not like the idea, the Hessians never had a chance.
At the First Battle of Trenton, one of Hand's riflemen caused chaos among the Hessian forces by shooting their leader, Colonel Rahl.
Rahl, high up on his horse, made a perfect target. One of Hand's Pennsylvania riflemen shot him. At first, he dismissed it as a flesh wound. It was not. He was mortally wounded. He fell off his horse. The Hessians now lost their commanding officer, and a number of them were held as prisoners of war and later marched through Philadelphia. This was done to show that for the first time, the Americans had actually captured some of the enemy.
Washington assigned him, number one, at Trenton, obviously, to get in between the Hessians and Princeton to keep them from getting there. And one of Hand's things that he's noted for is his troops did block the Hessian retreat out of Trenton, allowing a number of the Hessian soldiers to be captured.
With the American victory secured at Trenton, Washington now needed to shift his attention north. The greatest military in the history of mankind was rapidly advancing toward him, and they were led by Lord Cornwallis, the top field commander of the British Army.
Lord Cornwallis is one of the best lieutenants that the British military have. By lieutenant, I mean a sub-commander who's able to take an entire army independently into the field and accomplish a mission. Without doubt, he's good. He's real good.
They sent their best field commander, Cornwallis, with 8,000 picked troops, quick marching from New York City. And it looked again as if Washington's army would be crushed. And Washington again did the unexpected. This is what's so revolutionary about the Revolution. Again and again, Americans did things that the British couldn't think about because they always did things by the book. They never adapted.
He's got a great big ace up his sleeve. But first he has to accomplish something special. He has to make sure that Lord Cornwallis, when he comes for him, gets there very, very, very late in the day, because Washington's battle plan will not survive a long, protracted battle. It's got to be short, sharp, and nasty. He does short, sharp, and nasty very well. So he comes up with the idea, and I must be frank with you, I can't recall another occasion when Washington has done this. He uses an infantry screen.
And Washington used his riflemen, his murderers, as his rear guard to slow down the entire British Army for a vital 6 hours. That's all Washington wanted, 6 hours. Give me 6 hours to get my army around behind them.
As Washington retreated from Cornwallis, he called upon General Alexis Roche de Fermoy to lead a rearguard action delaying the British forces. But Washington's knack for choosing strong leaders was uncharacteristically lacking with his selection of Fermoy.
Alexis Roche de Fermoy, an interesting character, a Frenchman who was known to be a heavy drinker, who later disgraced himself at Saratoga.
And he comes to America with fine clothes and a retinue of flunkies, and he wants a commission in the army. But he's not going to go directly to Washington. He goes to the Continental Congress. He figures he can bluff them better than he can Washington. So he presents his documents and his credentials, and then his people are talking in French, which most of the people in the Continental Congress don't understand, except maybe for John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. And they build this wonderful picture of what a great military leader he was in Europe, so they give him a commission as a brigadier general.
Fermoy, it's New Year's, gets drunk, gets back on his horse, and gallops off, not to be seen again for weeks.
This has never been explained. There's no documentation, there was no court-martial, there's nothing there for us to understand why he did it, what excuse he had, if any, and why he wasn't immediately called to task on it.
Hand was forced to take over, Colonel Ham, take over the command, and very skillfully used his one talent that he seemed to have before all others in fighting delaying actions, doing ambushes, using the prowess of the Pennsylvania riflemen to snipe at the British soldiers and delaying them in heading towards Trenton and possibly trapping George Washington in the main army.
With General de Fermoy gone and Colonel Hand in charge, the stage was set for Washington's infantry screen. Fermoy's departure was a blessing in disguise. All of Edward Hand's experiences, both militarily and on the frontier, had prepared him for what would surely be his toughest challenge.
This man had hands-on, personal, in-your-face, hard-time experience. He knew what he was doing, and he had the right mentality, that determination to back it up.
In Lancaster County, where Colonel Edward Hand went and settled, mostly it was Germans, and they came to America for peace. But they also knew how to fight when they had to. They also knew how to make the most advanced weapon of the time, the rifle.
While it may have appeared that Hand and his small band of